Good afternoon, everyone. Simon Clarke from American Lithium, joined with my colleague Ted O'Connor to talk about our uranium project with the guys from
this
Crux.
fellow over here. Yeah. Well, welcome to London. Good to see you.
Yeah.
And you came by my hometown,
Dublin. Dublin's first city.
Right. I'll check for reports. And good to see you again.
It is good to see you.
Right. Now, I'm going to start with this guy.
Yeah.
Because he's been doing some heavy lifting and all the work, quite frankly. We're here at the WNA conference, the World Nuclear Association conference downstairs. You've been part of the team that's put together the report, which I think comes out later today, we're going to say.
Yeah.
I'll say later today when this video comes out. So what were you doing? What was your involvement?
So, for the past several years, I've been involved with working group meetings as an observer and contributor, not a full member, which that will change going forward. But there's a series of meetings where people talk about specifically uranium supply and demand, where that's our working group. And they basically build the supply stack to meet demand on our side from existing production. Then you have idle capacity now. You never used to have it, but post-Fukushima, that's a reality. And then you start putting in projects that are a bit more down the track. And our project, Macusani, we got elevated from what they called potential supply, so nebulous out there in time, up to the prospective mines category, because we have an economic study. We have a timeline now that the Peruvian government is talking about shortening permitting times. There's no less of an issue with that. So we've been elevated. Our project is up in the prospective mines category, which is quite significant for us. The project's been around since 2006, and through a lot of iterations, we now have this large 124 million pound uranium resource and proven economics that say it's going to be quite low cost potential operation. So that's what makes it one of the better projects as opposed to some of the ones further down the track, and also, that haven't even really seen a drill hole since the last cycle.
Right, but to come back to the report, because I'm intrigued about how these things get together, because it's not a big industry in uranium space, right? So there's very few, I guess there's two trade bodies, UXC and Trade Tech. You can put the data together for utility buyers, for banks, and for the companies themselves to understand where they sit in the mix here. So this report is super important in terms of, as you mentioned, supply and demand. That's how the money's made, and your responsibility is to do it economically, but we as investors need to understand, is there going to be supply to meet the demand? What's the quick answer, one word?
Well, yes, but you have to layer in price, which is something the World Nuclear Association cannot and does not do.
Right. Why not?
Well, there are, OPEC-style trade, restrictions where you're not supposed to talk about cost, price, or anything else. So that doesn't get factored in. Some international bodies actually put quite a large range, like the International Atomic Energy Agency Red Book. They have cost ranges.
Right.
But here, there's no cost. So, yes, there's sufficient supply. We shouldn't alarm governments to support nuclear energy because there's lots of uranium to feed these things. It's at what cost?
Right.
And, in reality, the price of the uranium coming out the mine mill door has very little bearing on the actual cost of nuclear energy production. In reality, it's the exact opposite of natural gas.
Right.
Smaller front end capex, but operating costs can fluctuate, and the electrical price can fluctuate incredibly.
Okay, so it's small as a percentage of the infrastructure that's feeding into, and then
the all-in cost of nuclear energy electricity production has very little to do with the uranium price.
Right. I guess what I'm trying to get at, investor, is where do I put my money? So I think the economics, putting a range and not talking about the range, is not helpful to me. as an investor, but I can understand why you guys have to operate like that to be, purportedly, unbiased as you can be, right? But economics do come into it. Companies need to be able to make money. They need to be able to produce economically, and that does affect the timing and the capability of companies to be able to feed into that supply dynamic that you're laying out in the report, right? So, understanding that, are all developers going to get into production in this cycle?
I would say that the short answer is probably not. And I'll give you a hard example from our project. When we did the economic study, and we're in the process of updating that, it's a bit dated, 2016, but we used $50 a pound uranium selling price, U308. And all the projects at that time, 2016, were using 65 or more. Fast forward to today, those same projects that use 65 are using 65 again, maybe 70, and we can still use 50. And guess what? The spot price is over 60 this week. So we're quite comfortable with where we are as far as if all goes well with our permitting, with our new economic study, that we will be in production.
Yeah.
Eventually.
And I think, Matt, I mean, the nuclear fuel report, as Ted said, they have to show that there is enough supply. But as you talked about before we came on air, you have zombie projects in that mixture of projects that require a much higher price, but they don't necessarily, they still factor those in.
Yeah.
The reality is, are those projects truly going to be able to make it? And I think, clearly with the move up in the category for us, there's a lot more belief in projects like ours, especially, as Ted said, with the extremely strong economics.
That's what I'm trying to work. I'm trying to work out who's at the zoo here, because we did talk about the zombie project, and that basically means, here we go again. They're bringing them back up to the surface. Back to life. Maybe this time they'll work. No, they don't. And there's a lot of that, but there's a lot of very destructive and distracting to investors. But I think they're easier to spot. It's the bigger, more advanced development type stories and plays that concern me, because I'm listening to the past couple of days to industry insiders point at some of the poster child projects, going, well, actually, that thing has been high graded to heck. Actually, they've only got 5 years life of mine. It's not quite as advertised. So I know you guys take a lot of this into account in the report, and I know you discount to a degree, but you don't necessarily present all of that information why? Because
well, no, but first of all, there are company questionnaires on the supply, the demand side.
Filled in by the company.
Filled in by the company.
Right.
Here's our plans. Here's what and I did the same thing for our project.
Yeah.
Based on our public information for those countries and projects that you don't know much about, some of the Russian, some of the, you name it, it's based off publicly announced information, whether it's reactor builds. China says we're going to do this. It gets factored in. There's been some delays. Those are factored in. It's as good a report as one can get based on the fact that it's industry-led, this organization.
Yeah.
But they're trying to look at the whole world.
Right.
On all levels.
Yeah. No, I like it's a big task and a big project, etc. But me coming as a realistic investor, fundamentals-driven investor, I know some will not get into production because they can't raise the capital. Some won't get into production because they can't technically manage it. Some won't get into production because the price incentive isn't there for them yet.
Yeah.
And there's lots of reasons why there'll either be no production or delays, etc. So I want to focus on what's real. So coming to you, Simon. See,
you're saying I'm real?
You're real. You're real.
He's not from Macusani.
Is you've got your task at hand for one of your 3 projects is to get this Peruvian uranium project up and running and into production. Because once you show that you're closer to production, you have a different sort of conversation with these utilities. You get some indications about what they'd be prepared to do. You can therefore have different conversations with the banks in terms of the cost of capital available for not just the money's available, but the cost of that money available to you. And that gives you a sense of how you insert yourself into that whole narrative of, we will be a producer, and then there's a bunch of people over here talking about being producers. So given that's your task at hand, what have you come here to do at the WNA? What are you looking to find out?
Well, listen, I think the work that Ted has done, for the nuclear fuel report, I mean, that gives people more credibility. We've actually had a couple of strategic approaches recently talking about how strong the project is based on independent reviews of the industry red book and other material like this, which validates our project without us having to go and necessarily promote. They've done their own due diligence. So I think that's really strong. I think for us, like we talked about on the lithium side, we're seeing really good moves in Peru that, the government there is and it doesn't happen overnight, but they're very much looking to fast track permitting, mine building. And so I think what we know with Macusani is, provided it can get the capital focus and be driven, the velocity within the project is huge. I mean, it's ready to pilot, as we've talked about. We think the resource gets a lot bigger. We continue to find targets pretty much every day up there to expand. And as you remember, it's a series of satellite deposits because it's a consolidation play. Well, the reality is a bunch of those deposits are going to run together. We know that. So the resource is going to get bigger. We're ready to pilot. Part of piloting is not only because we're very comfortable with the flow sheet, but it will also give us material that we can share with strategic players who are already showing a lot of interest in the project. So, we're here to talk to some strategics to keep the profile of the project up, to talk to lots of interest from more of the mainstream banks as well. But, Ted's obviously doing the important industry work. We have Lawrence with us as well. So, yeah, we have a bunch of meeting over the next couple of days, mainly on the strategic side.
Right.
And you hit the nail on the head. I mean, the strategics are looking for those projects that are real. And I don't mean real, but ones that can actually make money in a realistic price range and actually have a good chance of coming on. And we do believe that if the permitting measures being talked about in Peru come on, that this project could be in production by late 26.
Right.
Maybe early 27, but it's a fast track. To drive this through updated PEA, pre-fees, and then mine permitting. They're talking about 6 months. Now, we're more conservative in those expectations, but it's still a project that has a lot of velocity.
Right, and it's time's light, and time is unfortunately time, but just that timing the market. So let's be clear about when I hear that, I think mostly is like we're going to time the market. What does that mean in the case of uranium? Because what's the future of uranium? I don't know. So what's timing the market?
Well, I mean, we've already seen with us, we looked at spinning the project out, and we concluded that the timing wasn't right. And, because we own the asset and we're well capitalized, we weren't in a rush and we were able to pull back. And so I think for us, it's, continuing to see positive developments in Peru, drilling, moving the pilot side of things forward. And then, finding the right market environment to make sure this project is in its own vehicle, because that will ultimately maximize the velocity.
This question, what are the discussions that you've had around that one? Because everyone's sort of view that there's been accretive growth on the uranium price. Yeah, we've had 61 million at one point. So it's really starting to move the right direction. Yeah, I've never been a uranium 200 or what I was saying these days 500 guy, but its accretive growth is good enough, right? The trade bodies think the same thing. I think industry insiders think the same thing, but investors sometimes get a bit carried away. If you kind of see this growth trajectory starting to open up a bit, do you have within the remit that you've got, you set yourselves at board, the ability to say, do you know what, actually, maybe we don't need to separate this out. mean, actually, we can get the funding, and there is the ability to mingle the team.
I think for sure we can, and we're not in a rush. But the reality is we are seen as a lithium developer, and there's no doubt that in an
energy company.
Well, you could be, but
change the words.
We could change the words, but most people look at us and say, most developers, it's hard enough to move one advanced development project forward, let alone 3. And are you a lithium player or a uranium? Yes, you could call yourself an energy. But I think what's clear is we don't get any value as a company for the uranium side today. Maybe that will change.
Maybe if uranium does go over 100 bucks, maybe that's
for sure.
That's what I'm saying.
And
options
and we have an open mind. Okay. I mean, I think we showed that by we could have spun it out. We could have put it in its own vehicle. We think it would have. It wasn't
not that pressure to do that.
Exactly. Right. So as we move forward, we'll continue to assess the best strategic move. I think as I sit here today, I would think that a spin out into its own vehicle where our shareholders benefit is probably still the right choice. But we're not going to rush into it, and we are going to continue to assess all strategic options
and drive all 3 projects forward.
Yeah. And as Ted said, the value of it's only increasing.
Yeah.
We're seeing that from the industry. We're seeing that as the price goes up, and this is a really significant asset for us, and we'll continue to treat it as such and do the right thing.
Okay, so coming back to the kind of country, but I just want to, because again, we've seen a few instances like Niger. It's been an unhappy time for the companies developing projects there, and I'm sure lots of other knock-on effects too. But country risk is important. You know that a little bit from Peru. Peru hasn't for the last 4 or 5 years had plain sailing. It's had its ups and then it's had its downs, and we seem to be back on an up now. So that kind of jurisdictional de-risking is quite important. But what is actually happening? Can you give us some clues, Ted, and yourself there? But in terms of the ability to move your project forward at the speed that you need to, what's actually changed in terms of the government decision-making, communication, etc.?
I'll start with, it hasn't changed.
Okay.
Our local community support.
Okay.
We've worked uninterrupted except for this last 5 months.
You mean positively?
Positively, exactly. So we worked uninterrupted, and in Peru, you can't set foot on the ground without the community saying okay, because they are the communal where we work, communal landowners, the association. So that's been a constant. They've been lobbying the central government to let us get going, let us get back to work, give us our drill permits, things like this. So that hasn't changed, but what has changed, Simon can.
Sure, yeah. I mean, what I would say is, you never want to say never, but Peru historically has been, probably one of the better jurisdictions in South America. It's got a very strong mining code, a very fair fiscal regime. Mining's a huge part of the economy, and they understand and they know that. And you usually have a center-right Congress in Peru which backs business and mining as a part of that. The issue, as we've talked about from time to time, and hey, it's not for me to talk about it as an issue, it's for the Peruvian people, but they have a presidential process that does allow, because you have all these center-right parties that fragment the vote, you can end up with, some politicians or presidents that are not tried and tested, politicians who, lean more to the left, and then when they're at loggerheads with the parliament, that can cause issues. So that's kind of what we've come through in the last piece, and although we weren't able to get a lot through the main permitting channels, our team on the ground did an excellent job of moving the projects forward. Despite that, we filed the EIA early on Falchani that allowed us to do a bunch of drilling. And we've continued to do a lot of work on the background, on the field, on the uranium side, and we've done a lot of lab work on both. So we've continued the momentum there. But, up until recently, we weren't able to drill. what's changed for us, I think, and we didn't know what was going to happen when the new government came in December, and obviously there was a social unrest fed by people whipping up some of the left-wing elements in country, and so we didn't know what would happen. But, I think we've been really pleasantly surprised, and this has been borne out by a number of other players, not just us, where we now have a government that seems to have, gone across party lines, very much looking for a government that can work with the Congress, can get the support of the Congress, can get things done. And they've really embraced the economy as the means to try and, bring more wealth into the more remote areas of the country and help the poorer parts of the country. And I think that's been the right approach. And within that, we've seen them. For us, they've talked about really wanting to see lithium developed as an industrial mineral, and they've made that comment publicly a number of times. In general, cutting permitting times, reducing the environmental permitting from 21 months to 3 months. Looking to lithium as a non-metal, if everything worked, should only take 6 months to permit a mine anyway. For uranium, which is a metal, it would still typically be longer, but they've set this goal of 6 months for all mines. So it's a good environment, and things never happen as quickly as you'd like, and we're still waiting for our final drill permit on the uranium side. We do expect it any time, but as I mentioned, in the interim, we are going to be moving the project into the pilot phase and having momentum that way. So, this government in Peru is being talked about as the most pro-mining government, since Alberto Fujimori 20 plus years ago. And we're seeing some really good signs, and, hopefully that will continue. But it's, when you look around the countries around us, I'd much rather be in Peru right now than those other countries.
Okay. I'm actually going to take a question from the back of the room. Any questions for the young man at the back there? You've listened to this. What else do we need to know?
Or
this one here.
Anything you'd like to add?
Look, I think we have to trust very much the jurisdiction, the country, and the rules of law in any country. Mining is a risky business. Either you accept to be in mining or you do not accept to be in mining. So the moment when you accept to be in mining, you have to understand two things. Can I work with the rules and regulation of that country under that framework, and can I work with those communities? And then comes probably the most important thing that sometimes you forget about. What's the strength of our commodities? Are they good enough? Can they be a mine for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, Because we talk about zombie projects, So look, the issue is a lot of the uranium will come back, but a lot of them will probably not have the legs for the next stage of the development. In Peru, and I'm a long believer of that country, not only that has, as it was re-emphasized during this interview today, but we have one of the best mining jurisdictions in the world with deposits that are world-class. And I do believe that Peru as a society, also there are inclination to the left every now and then, but they come to the middle. They come to the center, and they allow the countries to develop. Mining is important, and this project that we try to develop in Peru can produce uranium for the Peruvian society and for the world in general, for the new needs of the electric revolution that we are living through today, not for 1 to 5 years. We have the resource. What we have modeled in the past can last for at least 20 years, but we know that the resources are much larger. Peru can be an uranium producer for, and probably now I'm just making a commitment that I shouldn't, for 30, 40, 50 years. So we are looking at an uranium field that will probably be in the history books of mining for many years to go.
We can't see his face. We don't know who said that.
I'd just like to attribute that to Lawrence Stefan.
Well,
I do agree.
He seems very keen on Peru. He loves very confident about Peru, and we know his technical prowess. So we're in good hands, aren't we?
We're in very good hands.
Ladies and gentlemen,
and with Ted.
Absolutely, I was including Ted for sure. Someone's going to make us look good.
They do.
Ted, good to see you again, sir. Thank you very much for sharing the insights. Congrats on the report. Simon, good to see you.
Good luck to Ireland.
The occurrence there.
Good luck to Ireland.